Welcome to another episode of Otherworldly Encounters with Mike, and as always, co-host Brian. We're excited for today's episode because we have a special guest joining us to share some incredible personal experiences, and I guess dolphin sex.
You never know what we're going to get into on this show.
No, I'm actually really looking forward to this one. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you were setting this up and we were talking about the topics. Mm-hmm. Once he threw out dolphin sex, man, I was in. Hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. So, but before we get started, what are we drinking today?
Yeah, man, weapons of choice. So you brought these over. I have, today's game day, I'm decked out in my Bengals apparel. I have the Cincinnati Fan Zone India Pale Ale.
And you know what's bullshit about this is it's game day, right? And you never told me you were doing weird because I would have supported my Browns jersey. But then when I was like, hey, why didn't you say something? You're like, well, I did that on purpose.
Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, Mike, and you just weren't lucky today.
No. So my fan zone is the Cleveland Browns.
Okay.
You know, the better of the two teams.
And we got a guest on that I believe has a cocktail in his hand as well.
Yeah. So we'll get with his here in a second.
All right. Well, let's crack ours.
Let's crack ours and get at it.
Roll.
All right, do you want to do the introduction?
Yeah, so today is pretty cool. Longtime friend of mine from Northwest Ohio. We were actually in a band together for quite a while, and we've always kind of chit-chatted about the unknown, UFOs, paranormal, everything in between. So today I'm pretty excited. We got my buddy Paul on.
What up? I am drinking Stella Artois, and I am rooting for the fucking Dolphins.
Perfect. Perfect for today's conversation, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. So what band were you guys in together?
It was a high school band. It was called Old Crow because we used to find the cheapest liquor we could to drink, and Old Crow was usually in hands. That's check with you, Paul?
Bottom shelf whiskey. Yep.
That's it.
Nice.
Yep.
That's how we rolled.
Awesome. All right, Paul. So what do we exactly are you bringing to us today? Like what are we actually going to be talking about?
So I actually know two of your previous guests, Mitch and Sean, and so I know Sean had mentioned. I think they both mention different sightings or experiences? I think they both did. Did they not?
I don't think we heard a sighting or experience from Mitch, did we?
No, not from Mitch, I don't think.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he is the more somber of the two, but we'll have to keep prodding him until he lets out all those demons.
Got it.
So I personally have had an experience myself, and I work at a major automotive manufacturer. I don't know if I should, or I guess I won't say who, but it's a non-American major manufacturer out of Anna, Ohio. So if you really want to know, Google. So one night in 2018, I'm leaving work. It's about 2:30 in the morning, and I am smoked, tired. I mean, it's not physically demanding, but you're talking repetition over and over and over and over and over again. A lot of, monotony. So I'm driving and I'm kind of slumped back in my chair, and my eyes aren't falling asleep. They're not closing. I'm not drifting off. I was completely awake, just, relaxed, ready to get home, not thinking about anything, like complete spot in my mind, just staring ahead. And there is a greenhouse right by the exit for Wapakoneta, and it was extremely overcast. So you can't see a single star. And the greenhouse is on, so it's lit up like almost like daylight, right? So I even perk up a little bit as I'm getting closer because it's getting brighter, and I'm almost home. So there is a tank manufacturing plant to the north of Wapakoneta, and to the north of that, there is a refinery, and it has been something discussed around the area of Wapakoneta, Lima, Shawnee, that if we ever get attacked by terrorists or whatever, they're going to hit that refinery tank plant. We're all going to die, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like in the back of my mind. It's something people from around here live with and think about. Well, as I'm driving, I shit you not, there is a light in the sky. What I see, what I genuinely think happens, I think the tank plant refinery has just exploded. Like, it looks like the brightest flash I've ever seen of fire explosion that suddenly shrinks down to a tiny little point in the sky, crisp edged, sharp little point, sits there for like a second, and then you could perceive it, but it shot off north towards Lima, completely horizontal to the ground. What it reminded me of was like a filament. Like if you watch a light filament, right? Like you see it travel, it's almost beyond perception, it's so fast, but you kind of see like the trail, right?
Mm.
It wasn't a trail. It was like my eye trying to catch the movement of this thing. Whatever it was, my first thought was, okay, could that have been like a meteorite, like airburst meteorite, right?
Mm.
For that to happen, when I'm driving, right, when this thing shoots to the north, it's level to the ground. So it's stationary, and then it shoots off and it's parallel to the ground. So like it's not coming in at an angle from out of atmosphere. It's already in atmosphere. So unless a meteorite can skip on atmosphere, stop, then shoot the other direction, I saw something weird.
You know, Paul, that I find that fascinating because you remember when I was telling you I was out walking or letting
yeah.
the dog out one night, right?
Yeah.
And there was this huge flash in the sky to where I was like, it was almost blinding, right? It was like kind of made me squint, but it faded out and it turned into just a single point. Now I didn't see it move or anything like that, but it pretty much mirrors what Paul's description was. That's fascinating. That's super
interesting.
weird. Yeah. Because
How
if you remember,
many times?
because if you
How
remember,
many times have you thought about it? Sorry.
thinking about it, I just, whenever we're, shooting the shit or whatever, we brought up that one time. But if you remember, Justin, our guest we had on with Holly, he saw the similar, thing
that.
too. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's interesting.
Yeah. Coincidence, you might call it.
Well, we have three.
Right.
Yeah. So didn't we say three was
Not a coincidence anymore. Or was it 6?
Well, I think the 6 was just an arbitrary number we threw out there, but I think 3 is what
Got it.
we decided.
Yeah, so we got
Gregory,
3.
I think.
So, Paul, did you lose time at all? Like, that's a thing that I hear oftentimes. Like, when people see stuff, they're like, whether it's 15 minutes or a couple hours, there's this big gap and you don't really remember anything. Did you have
question? No. And I'll tell you, so I vape, right? So I quit smoking a couple years ago, and we have lenses all around us reflecting light all the time. So in my car while I'm driving, I'm doing this. Right. So it lights up. And if you're in the dark, it's going to reflect on surfaces. So my first thought was, okay, that's my vape popping up in the windshield and I'm tripping. Right? Like I'm just tired and like I'm seeing shit.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to recreate it. I'm getting off on the exit and driving into Wapak, and like my heart's beating out of my chest, and I'm trying to recreate it because I'm, trying to convince myself what I saw was normal.
Yeah.
I cannot recreate it, and then I actually get pulled over for driving erratically in Wapak, and I don't get cited. I go home. So the next day, I go back to that major automotive manufacturer, and I'm talking to everybody because I was on 75 going north, right? Yeah. Granted, it's 2:30 in the morning, but we are an entire shift that gets off. There's got to be somebody that saw it.
Plus, it's an interstate, right? Like there's a lot of traffic, regardless of time of day.
Right.
Yeah.
I asked person after person.
Yeah.
Bright. I'm talking like my heart's beating out of my chest for a second. I sat up in my seat, got close to the windshield, thought I was going to die, and then was like, what is that? Yeah. Right? And then it was gone. Yeah. This has plagued my mind every day since 2018. I think about it once a day. I feel confronted by it. That's what I would say. Confronted.
Interesting.
So
that's crazy. So this happened in 2018.
2018.
See, that's crazy shit. I mean, several years later now, like I say, myself and Justin saw something similar to that. But Paul, I do appreciate the due diligence in trying to debunk. You just didn't take what you saw for face value. It was just like
investigate the possible root cause.
Absolutely. So I actually do appreciate that.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in, honestly, is the truth, right? I just want to know stuff. And I don't care what the answer is. I don't care if it's, extremely explainable and not good podcast. I couldn't explain that if I tried. And so then I keep asking people, and I've talked about it a lot. It's not like I've been quiet about it. I'm a weird person. So then so then I'm at work a couple years later, and I'm telling yet another guy about the story, right? And his eyes get real big, and he goes, "Dude, 2018?" And I go, "Yeah." And he says, "I know a guy that says he saw something like that." And I said, "Get him down here." Right. And that's not an easy thing to do in a factory, but
Right.
mountains were moved in short order. This guy's standing in front of me, crossed the line, and we're talking. We could barely contain our excitement, right? Because it feels validating when somebody else has seen the weird thing, right?
Yeah.
Everything I described, he's describing as I'm describing. Saw it in Anna. It was reported on MUFON and Botkins. I saw it in WAPOC. So if you want to look it up, I actually was trying to do it before the podcast, but they've since added like a password registration thing. And I just said, screw it. But you can actually look up on MUFON. It's in Botkins, Ohio, November of 2018. And there is a report. Huh. It's a light in the sky moving along I-75 north.
So Paul, you said when you witnessed this, you felt like, was it kind of like adrenaline? Your heart was racing. Were you scared, nervous, like all the above, or was it just what? Tell me what your feelings were, and I'll tell you like how I felt during the moment.
So knee jerk, because I'm doing 70 miles an hour at 2:30 in the morning in a car. I thought I was going to die. My initial knee jerk was, okay, I'm going to die now. Like I leaned forward, waited. It was like a wince moment where you're like, all right, here I go. I thought I was dying. And then it didn't. It shrunk down into a thing. And then I thought, nothing. It's like, you can't, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
You don't have, we're not at all equipped. And I'm going to get into this, but it's absurd. The word absurd is important, but like, it's because it's absurd that it's memorable, but it also confronts us and says, hey, I don't care what your government told you. I don't care what your mom told you. I don't care what you think when you're alone, when you're praying. I'm right here.
So I find that I guess everybody's personal experiences can be different, but like, remember when I told you, when I saw whatever I saw, I actually felt at peace. Like
I remember you saying that.
Yeah, to me it was just like it happened, but then it's like just this calming. I don't know if that's what relaxed feels like because I haven't been relaxed for.
Was that before or after the Gregory episode?
This was before Gregory.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but this was after we actually filmed, or we filmed one of our podcasts. It was that night. Mm-hmm. And so that was the part that was just kind of trippy. It was after that.
Before we go to the next part, Paul, I got to ask, the police officer that pulled you over, you said you got out of the speeding ticket. Did you ask him about it, and had he seen it?
Oh yeah, I was manic. I'm in my seat, and like I said, I'm weird. So like I genuinely, like if I'm in a traffic stop, I'm going to talk to you like I'm talking to you guys right now. I don't do the mask thing. I'm trying not to. But so he's asking me questions, and I'm smiling and talking to him, and I'm sure he's thinking this guy's drunk, right? He didn't smell anything, and I was like cognitive and like, kind of backed off when I saw the worry on his face. But it was like, well, imagine if you saw that, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not going to just calm down. I just saw something profound, or whatever it was interesting. Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about this, and he's describing seeing exactly what we're describing. And he's on a bridge in New York City, getting ready to walk into New York, right? And it's picturesque. As he's walking in the dark night sky, he sees a bright flash, and he keeps watching it. Now he's an astrophysicist, right? He's watching this bright light, and it gets brighter, then goes away. And then he thinks, that was a meteorite.
Yeah.
Its trajectory was for my face. So like, if it hadn't have burned out, it would have went through his face. I mean, if you're seeing it, right, if you're seeing it from that perspective and you're not seeing a trail, it is lined up to hit you in the eye.
Sense.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, yep.
So like the odds on that are astronomical. I mean, pardon the
Right.
word, but like
So
it is interesting that there are explanations for seemingly unexplainable events,
Right.
but like I don't know that that would explain what happened to you. But
So, Paul, for the New York one, you brought up a good point. So, if you're facing something and it's getting, it's not to look like it's moving, right? Because it's you're at eye
right,
level or whatever. But it would
right,
also start to appear to get bigger as it started getting
and brighter.
closer, right?
Yep,
So, did he
yep.
report that, like that sensation of it getting bigger, or did it stay the same
I
size
can't.
the entire time?
I can't recall. I think he mentions it getting brighter, and that was the cue that it's like coming at him.
Okay.
But like, I don't know that it got bigger in the sky or not. I can't recall that.
That
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So this kind of segues, and Paul, I guess before I segue, you have anything else on that story, your experience?
I would just say, I, I, I want to say don't dwell on that stuff because you can't do anything with it, right? And like, it's just aberrant information.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it almost feels like one of the most important things that has ever happened in my life. So it's like, how do you do that? And
Yeah.
I think that's why the people in the UFO community oftentimes are labeled as like nuts or psycho or crazy. It's because
They're
they have,
ostracized.
well, and they've experienced
Yeah.
something, right? So when you imagine the first time you have an orgasm, right? You'll want to fucking talk about it because it's like, oh my gosh, that's life experience. That's good, right? This isn't that, but it's just as impactful on your psyche and your mind, right? It's, or at least it was for me. It's something else knocking at your door saying, hey, you didn't investigate this corner.
Yeah.
So Paul, for those who may have had experiences like the one that you had and the one that I had was somewhat similar, is there a place, I believe you mentioned MUFON, is that the only place for they can report this type of stuff, or is there somewhere else that, our viewers and listeners can reach out to?
I'll be honest, it's a desert, and I think that's by in design. MUFON in the past, and I'll get into this when I talk about Chris Bledsoe, but in the past, MUFON has gone after individuals on behest of the government. So, like, if you're going to report to MUFON, understand, like, depending on what regime's in Washington and who's going to get that file at the Pentagon, you might end up having a miserable life because of it.
So,
And that
so MUFON is not an independent
it
investigative
is.
group.
It is, but the CIA infiltrates, right? And so it's not just the CIA, but the FBI, and they've admitted as much. So like, there's a guy named Christopher Doty. If you guys get into the counter intel side, but like, they're hired. Their job is to spread false stories and then try to get people to go along with that and report things like that. Then they know those are fake reports, right? So like, it's an open secret is my best understanding of this
We've
topic.
heard a lot about disinformation campaigns throughout time for different reasons, and we know that's a real thing. Whether that's directly applicable here or not, we don't know. But it wouldn't shock me.
No,
right?
Because like we talked about in the past, it's certain entities within the United States want us don't want us to know what we want to know, but they want us to know what they want us to know. And there is a lot, to your point, disinformation, but they want us to focus on over here and not over here.
Yeah, it's like sleight of hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
I think it's all of those things and more. I mean, you're going to use every tool in your box.
Right. So I want to, the segue, and Mike, when you said it, it triggered me. You were like, when you saw the light in the sky, you're like, I felt a sense of like calm and peace. And over the last several episodes that we've done, we've talked to, like, Gregory was a big one, and what's going on up there. We've talked to Pastor Judd, same kind of thing, like this kind of boundary between religious and the unknown and paranormal, and kind of the big figure in ufology is Christopher Bledsoe. And Paul, you and I have talked about him a bunch of times. We brought him up on the podcast, but we haven't really done a deep dive into who he is at all. And Paul, I think that's kind of where we can segue over to you, because you spent a lot of time looking up a bunch of different things. Like, and we could go a lot of different directions at any point in time. But today, I know we kind of talked about covering some of Christopher Bledsoe. So I want to segue over to you, because you know a whole lot more even than I do. So I'm curious to get your take on who he is, what he's done, and what we're going to talk about.
Right. So after seeing what I saw, and so not to get it twisted, I've always had a lifelong interest in the topic. I grew up watching X-Files, and like, I always wanted to see something. I want to believe, right?
Yeah.
But I'm also a lifelong atheist. So like when I was 5 years old, we were going to go to SeaWorld. And I'm on the toilet with diarrhea, praying to God that I don't have diarrhea at SeaWorld. This is at 5, because I really wanted to enjoy my trip to SeaWorld, right? And my family's not religious, but I'm 5, and I'm like, God's there to pray to. I don't want to have diarrhea, right? And that's my thinking at the time. God's there to pray to, right? He serves us, right? So it's like somebody we employ. So I'm on the toilet taking a shit, and I get done, and I had the worst day at SeaWorld. It was not good. And from that day on, I mean, I'm 6, laying in bed, cussing in my head, trying to like provoke God to like smite me, right? So it's been this antagonistic relationship since I was a kid with this thing that I thought, okay, well, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in it, but then I'm going to disprove it in every way possible, and I'm going to like make you feel dumb for believing and all this other stuff, right? Because I needed to reinforce the fact that I do not believe, right?
Yeah.
So after seeing what I saw, there's some cracks forming in my fortress of solitude, right? I'm like, okay, I can't explain that, and it's bothering me. So then I start diving down the rabbit hole, and I'm looking for exotic American technology, right? I want the goods. And so I haven't mentioned this, but I'm a veteran of the Air Force. And when I was younger, half the reason I joined the Air Force is because of something stupid Mitch said one time. We're kids, and he goes, I have a cousin that was in the Air Force, and dude, you have no idea the technology that's out there. 15 years, it's more like 35. And like, I was like, well, that's where I'm going to work, 35 years ahead of everybody else. Fuck them, right? but so it wasn't, my experience was not that, but so I go into it as a skeptic, and I'm looking for technology, and I stumble across that Tom DeLonge infamous episode on Rogan. I watch it, my eyes are this big, and I'm thinking, okay, cocaine maniac, this is nuts, right? So I'm watching, and then the To the Stars things comes out. Then the New York Times hits on it, and then it's just like an avalanche, right?
Yeah, big time.
So then none of that, I mean, I was compelled by it. None of that interested me as much as like David Fravor and Ryan Graves.
Yep.
These are 2 of the most accomplished naval aviators on the fucking planet, and they have everything to lose. Their eyes, their sanity, that's the only thing that keeps them flying. Every time or every few months, say you go to deploy, right? You have to go through a flight exam to make sure you're fit for flight. Yep. If you're seeing UFOs, you're not fit for flight. Right.
God,
and it's been the stigma.
Yeah, it's so important too. And so we covered Graves. I'm sure you know, we covered Graves and we covered Fravor extensively. And like, Graves specifically formed the Americans for Safe Aerospace Act because exactly to your point, they were afraid to report things because of that sanity test that you would have to go through. And there was no reporting mechanism in place until they kind of put one into place to say, it's okay to see weird stuff and report it. Now, how that works, it's great on paper, and how does that functionally work are 2 separate questions, but I think it's an important piece that you bring up. So what's the impotence for coming forward? Like, what do they have to gain?
Right. As well, Ryan Graves was concerned for his fellow airmen, right? They were having near miss collisions, right? Yeah. So this is, and not to mention, if we have an adversary that can fly literal circles around our aircraft, well, we have a fucking problem, right? So you don't ignore that. That's not something you ignore.
Right.
That's what we're publicly doing. I have to imagine privately it's not the case, right? I have to. So I'm researching everything, and eventually, like, it becomes like my one of my favorite meals, right? Like, after a hard day at work, I go home and do my fucking research. Well, one of the shows that came out during this time was The Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch, or whatever it's called. Uh, I'm watching it, and I'm not going to trash that show. I don't dislike it. I just dislike the Oak Island format in general. But I appreciate what they're trying to do.
Right.
So watching that, I have, my spidey sense is out. I'm skeptic. But like, they do a spin-off, and that spin-off is called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And the final episode of the first season, they go to Chris Bledsoe's house. Now, I'm familiar. I didn't know I was familiar, but I was familiar with this story from Unsolved Mysteries. And so years ago on Unsolved Mysteries, it's just one of the number of reports they make on that show, and they go through the experience, and it's him. He's a contractor, and he has his buddies with him and his sons with him. It's all late at night. They're all tired from work. They're sitting around a fire, and this dude's going through it. This is post 9/11, and he's a contractor for military bases. So like the work wasn't there. He does like housing and stuff, right? So he's going through all these foreclosures, and he's going to lose his business. So he's on the edge, and he's walking in the woods to pray. It's basically a call for help. So he's walking through the woods crying, tears rolling down his cheeks. God, please help me. And he keeps saying it. And then all of a sudden, he sees a burning disc in the sky, on fire right in front of him. Big. I forget how big. Big. I want to say like 15 feet. Do not quote me on that. So he's staring at it, transfixed. And then actually, I think he gets abducted at that time, but that's not discussed till later. So he goes back to the campfire eventually, and his son's not there, and everybody's pissed at him. And they're like, where have you been? And he, what do you mean? I just went in the woods. And they're like, no, you've been gone for hours. And he experiences sheer terror, because he understands his son's out there looking for him. And he remembers what he saw. So he runs in the woods looking for his son, and he finds him, and he's also staring at some burning disc in the sky. Absolutely terrified, mortified. And it actually fucked up this kid's life. So like, he's still fucked up. And I don't mean anything bad by that. I'm just going by what, the family has said. It really, 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 really messed with him. And experiencing stuff that you can't explain, nor explain to anybody else, nor talk about in public is not for everybody, right? If you're not comfortable with yourself or comfortable socially, that's going to be a nightmare scenario. So this family lived with this, okay? It wasn't quiet. It was on Unsolved Mysteries, and then they talked to MUFON. MUFON comes down and does a hit piece on them, and it sounds like it was compelled by a part of the Pentagon, or somehow they were involved, and they are known to do that, try to discredit witnesses. So his entire town ostracizes him. This man is a Pentecostal Christian. So he is absolutely ostracized by his entire community. They think he's in league with the devil, like the actual devil. So his family members and himself go through bouts of suicidal thoughts and, misery for the better part of a decade. And then the encounters ramp up. You're talking poltergeist type stuff, like potentially demonic encounters, like weird stuff. They do not understand any of it. After a certain amount of time, it all takes a change in tone. And then he starts to have good experiences with whatever he's seeing, or at least he's understanding them to be good, right? And I don't know how much of this is psychological, physical, spiritual, metaphysical, whatever you want to call it, whatever plane this is existing on. He's undergone post-hypnotic regression, and he believes this stuff. Like, this guy, when he tells these stories, he sobs the entire time.
So Paul, can I interject just real quick? So
absolutely.
So I guess from my understanding, when it comes to MUFON, it was basically created to be like a sanctuary for those to be able to who have had experience to be able to report said experiences, and kind of like a safe space in modern day terms. Are you saying that that's not really the case when it comes to MUFON right now?
I know that was not the case. I believe it was around 2008 or 9 when the episode came out. And I don't know if it was because they had a show on like History Channel or whatever. I mean, if you want to go the non-nefarious route, right, you're just trying to, do something salacious. And how do you ramp up a UFO story? Well, you make the guy look like a total monkey moron, right? And then it's funny at the end. Well, like that has consequences, especially if the person genuinely believes they saw what they saw, right? This
Right.
isn't somebody, I don't believe he is somebody, trying to steal your money or a charlatan trying to sell you something, although he is selling a book. I think the purpose of that book is for awareness and less about, trying to make the Bledsoe family immensely wealthy.
So, Paul, one thing I want to ask about, and I've listened to a bunch of podcasts, and actually, Mike, when we drove up to Michigan, we listened to, I forget, it was like an Irish or Scottish dude who had Christopher Bledsoe on, and he was telling the story that you were just kind of going through, Paul. And one of the things that he said that I thought was interesting is, and it's hard to say because this has been a long time. When was his original encounter? Actually, do you know what time frame that was, Paul? Where he saw the disc in the woods with his kids? I get
maybe 04, 06, something like that.
Okay.
It's been a
So a
long journey
time.
for the guy. Yeah.
And one of the things that he had said in the podcast,
wait.
yeah.
Not to interrupt you, but like that's not the beginning of it either. In the book, he says his entire life effectively he was shot in the back with a shotgun, damn near point blank, should have died. He did not die. Before he got shot, he sees an owl in the woods, and it is the last thing he remembers. The first woman he was married to, months after they get married, he's driving down the road and he comes across a devastating car wreck. It's her. She's dead in the mangled mess on the side of the road.
Jeez.
Again, there are very strange things that have gone on with this guy. He fell, I forget how many feet off a building into scaffolding, should have died, didn't die. So I'm not saying like fate or whatever. I'm not saying you can't kill Chris Bledsoe. But it does seem like, and I'll get into this if we have time, but like it seems like the Earth Coincidence Control Office at work, or ECHO. Yeah.
I actually don't know what that is. I want to come back to that. But real quick, one of the things that Christopher Bledsoe said from that encounter was that he felt like whatever that was had cured him. I think he had Crohn's disease. And then he had
and rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah.
And both were cured?
Yeah.
See,
that's
pretty weird.
It's beyond weird. There are senators that'll attest to that, man, laying hands on children with cancer and healing them. Senators that'll attest to that.
Bledsoe's laid hands on whatever, and
multiple people.
Wow.
And it's verified by government. Like, I'm not talking like logo. Like, do you know Hal Puthoff? Have you ever heard that name?
Yes. Mike, I don't know if you have. Probably. No. Yeah, Mike hasn't. So give the 30,000 foot of who that guy is.
Yeah, so it's impossible. He's if you believe everything that is said about that man, he's one of the most important scientists and government officials in the history of our country. But time will tell. I don't know if what he's saying is BS or not. But this man effectively started and ran our Third Eye spy programs. He's at the fundamental level of everything Tom DeLonge was trying to do, like at the base level. So this guy is, if I could pick one of the people I could have a conversation with, it would be Hal Puthoff.
Interesting. So what Christopher Bledsoe, for me, circling back to him, like one of the things that's so interesting to me about Christopher Bledsoe, and Mike, you and I talk about it all the time, like 90% of the stories we read and hear are bullshit, especially with the advent of AI. It just makes it hard to keep up with. But what makes Christopher Bledsoe so interesting to me is when you look at the peripherals of what's going on around him. And what's fascinating is, like, if he was totally full of shit, why is Space Force showing up and doing stuff with Christopher Bledsoe?
Do you know who John Alexander is? Have you ever heard that name?
No, I don't.
He is considered the Darth Vader of the UFO world. So like John Alexander, he's featured in The Men That Stare at Goats, and I forget which character he portrays, but this is a very serious guy that was no nonsense at all his entire career. Okay. And he was tied into the entire third eye thing. I mean, everything Hal Puthoff was involved with, this guy was like the heavy or the foil to. Okay.
Okay.
He meets Christopher Bledsoe in that day, sees an orb, and ever since been proselytizing for the subject. If that does not carry weight with you guys, I don't know what will. But like it should mean something. This is a colonel. Look him up, Colonel John Alexander.
That's interesting. And I know Christopher Bledsoe, even still to this day, will post routinely orbs on his property, and he'll be like, here's an orb, and take a video and show it, and like, here's the trees, and it's like, you can't.
Well, the crazy thing about that is there are people that, and I'm not telling anyone to do this. I hope you do not do this. Please don't do this. But if you can somehow reach out to Christopher Bledsoe or his family, there have been many people that have said being in his presence has allowed them to see something they know is impossible. So like, to be clear, Bledsoe has said this phenomenon has never left him since he saw it back in 2004 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Never.
Yeah, I mean, Colonel, the Colonel Alexander, man, he was 25 years Army, reached the rank of colonel, and he was involved in the intelligence, special operations, unconventional warfare. He was part of the U.S. Special Forces, the Green Berets, to be specific. He worked on various classified and high-level military programs.
Okay.
So the dude's legit.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention a guy too, not to get off topic, but I just want to say the name Joe McMoneagle and thank him, because that was our first third eye spy. And if you guys ever heard his story, it's insane. But the stuff that guy went through and did for this country, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But again, not to get off topic. So back to Chris, I read a skeptic my entire life. I now pray daily, every day. I've lost, and this is not a weight loss plan, but in the past year, I've lost 75 to 80 pounds. I'm completely different human being than I was when I saw that UFO in 2018. So I didn't start experiencing changes till I read that book. And I don't know that like religion or spirituality is real. I know what my experience with that has been, and I find it one of the more grounding things I've ever done. You'd think it'd be the opposite. It's not for me. It's a great way to deal with loss, and I think that book is a great way for people who have had a hard time getting into the faith of God or whatever. It's non-specific. It's more spiritual. It's not going to ask you to, accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. It's going to say, for instance, there is a tree in Chris Bledsoe's backyard that gets hit by lightning one night, catches on fire, will not die. Then one day it starts talking to them with a spirit box. I don't remember why they have a spirit box by the tree, but it says, hey, there's a man that's going to kill the Pope. You got to go to Pennsylvania. There's a bridge in Pennsylvania. There's a guy trying to kill the Pope. So Chris Bledsoe calls up his friends in Washington. They call a liaison for the Pope. They set up guys on a bridge in Pennsylvania and catch an assassin that was trying to kill the Pope.
So all this came from a spirit box, like a spirit box? And that's how he reported it to his friends in Washington, D.C. Hey, we're sitting out next to this tree with a spirit box, and it's telling us.
From a talking tree that catches on fire and won't die.
Nothing weird about that.
Wow. How about that?
So like I'm reading that book and bouncing my head off the wall. It's like, you can't, what are you going to say to that, right?
Well, and think about the dude on the other end of the phone when he's calling and says, hey, man, like,
we've got the burning talking tree.
I was standing next to this talking tree, and it just told me that the Pope is potentially going to be assassinated. We need to deploy whatever. Like, if you were,
I don't think I'd want to make that call.
But if you were on the receiving end, like, how would you, like, I know this dude's credible, but come the fuck on,
But,
right? You know
but
what I
see,
mean?
this
Yeah.
is how divorced from religion we are. We're talking about the holders of faith, right? These are the people that should believe with all belief that trees can catch on fire and talk, right? But like you're making a good point. As a culture, we have given up on those ideas.
Well,
We've given up on them.
it's fascinating, right? Like there have been a lot of theories around Moses and the burning bush, and what was the
Hmm.
burning bush, and was the burning bush
Supposedly acacia,
right?
supposedly.
Yeah. So was Moses just tripping and didn't know what tripping was, right? But then you fast forward, and here's this scenario with Christopher Bledsoe, and it makes you question it. So, Paul, one thing that I want to ask you, and it kind of goes to this topic, but like, talk to me about what you think around the intersection of kind of what Christopher Bledsoe is talking about, you know, with what are these orbs, and then what we would say are UAPs, UFOs. Like, are those one and the same? Like, how does that interlace in your mind? Because that's got to be a big part of this conversation. Is the conversation around religion and UFOs really one and the same? Or are they really two different things?
So there is a book I read when I was little, when I first started getting into this topic. I forget who recommended it to me, but it's called Flatland. And the premise of that book is you're stuck living on a two-dimensional plane. So you can't see any height dimension at all. It's only 2D. So you live on a sheet of paper. So imagine, if you will, what a three-dimensional object would look like to someone coming into 2D space. Imagine if it's a orb, okay, and you're a 2D flatlander. You would see this line appear out of nowhere that's very small, then it would get really, really, really wide, then really, really small again, then would completely disappear again. Now, to us, a sphere is not interesting at all. We deal with them daily. To a flatlander, a sphere is literal magic and anything else special you could ever describe, because it's hinting at something more about their reality, right? You're peeling back that corner. I think that's what UFOs are for us, but I don't know what they are. I think they're basically just harbingers that there are greater things out there, that this is the wilderness and we don't understand that we're living in it. I
So,
think we're limited by our sensory organs and our ability to perceive reality. And unless we close our eyes, ears, mouths, and listen and go deep, we're not going to understand this.
Fascinating, man.
yeah,
I don't even know. I don't even know how to like really, because we've talked about dimensions, right, and different all that stuff, and you know, I'm trying to picture in my mind, you know, like, how'd you describe them, Paul?
Flatland. Yep, flatland.
Flatlanders.
So imagine you're a piece of, like you draw a little dot on a sheet of paper with graphite, and you are that dot. So like there is no verticality to your world at all.
Okay. Yeah. Crazy.
yeah. I don't. Well, and it goes back to the three big questions, right? Like, are we alone? What happens when we die, and where do we come from? And that's really the premise of all of this podcast, is like anything that fits within there, because it's just interesting conversation. We don't have the answers, but all we can do is look into the research and decide for ourselves what's real and what isn't, and then try to stack enough evidence to say like this is legit, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's interesting.
It's very interesting stuff.
So
I
one of
almost
the
feel like I almost feel like since we're going down like these different topics, that we should do like a two-parter, and then we can get into the dolphin sex.
yeah, well,
Because I want that to kind of be on a standout, you know, just its own standalone episode right there.
Got it.
we could do an oral history of the topic, of the UFO topic.
I love the podcast format. We can talk about whatever the hell we want.
We do it.
It's great.
It's our world. We do we.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So, whoops. So, Paul, I guess with Christopher Bledsoe, let me ask you this: like, based on everything you've read, everything you've listened to, watched, do you think he's legit?
I think he absolutely believes everything he's saying. And I think that's all that really matters, right? So like if he believes all this and his intentions are pure and he's like really believes, so he believes he's in contact with an entity named Hathor, who is effectively Mother Earth or the Mother Goddess. And our government appears to believe this, that he is in contact and that's why they care, which should tell you some things too.
Wow. I didn't know that.
It's because of his depictions of what he has seen. So he said, do you want me to get into this? How are we looking on time?
Well,
Yeah.
before you get into that, I find it interesting on how you, when Brian asked the question, do you believe he's legit? And then you basically, it was like, well, he feels that what he's saying is truth. So does that mean you don't believe him? Or
No, I personally do believe him.
Okay.
And
All right.
I personally believe David Fravor. I personally believe Ryan Graves.
Yeah.
I'm on the fence about Grush. I want to believe him.
Travis Walton.
I just, he's harder for me to, so I want to believe him as well. And the guys that were with him. I don't want to say his experience didn't happen to him, but like, I've seen a dog have a seizure for 24 hours before and get up and kind of like not be the same, but like get up, right? So like, what if he had a seizure or a micro seizure, didn't know who he was, where he was, walked around the wilderness naked for a week and came back, right? That's possible.
Or what if he had a government contract that was due the day that he happened to be abducted and they couldn't fulfill the contract because he was abducted? That's
I mean,
Or that.
stark coincidence.
I mean, hypothetically,
Yeah.
hypothetically.
Yeah.
Hypothetically.
that could have happened.
So those type of things, right?
Yeah.
Like, so like if we look at Bob Lazar, for example, you asked me 10 years ago, what do I think about Bob Lazar, right? I'm a little bit harsher back then because I feel like he had less evidence backing up his claims.
Less to corroborate it.
I saw those, they measure the bones in your hands. They're a reader that he described. I saw them, right? So like they did exist in the 70s and nobody knew they existed in the 70s.
Right. The only thing
He was able.
The only thing that pisses
Sorry.
me off about Bob Lazar is just his scholastic background. Like that's such an easy thing to prove the naysayers wrong.
Right.
And I don't understand why he wouldn't just bring that shit out.
I think he says he doesn't care, but like everyone else does. So just pull the document and show us, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Is like I don't care what people think. Cool. I don't really care what people think either, but at some point, if you're at the, constantly just being shit on, specifically because of certain stuff that's easy to prove, just fucking prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And I think that with a lot of people, and I think, some of their, look, it's enticing to be the center of attention sometimes or entertain people. And I think it's easy to want to do that, right? Because like nobody else knows if you're lying but you. We have to understand that people are multifaceted. You could be a charlatan and a liar for 45 years, then see a UFO. No one's going to believe you ever. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, life's complicated. And I think if you look, so this is my best evidence for UFOs. And this is what I always go to at this point when I'm starting to question myself or question the legitimacy of what I'm talking about. Jacques Vallée, and sorry, I wrote this down just for this purpose. J. Allen Hynek.
Oh yeah, big names.
Project Blue Book. Okay, one of the most important things that came out of Blue Book. It wasn't the reportings. It wasn't the awareness. It wasn't the cases themselves. So the PC had been invented during the time of Project Blue Book, and one of the things they did, Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek went around the world and gathered mythology, religious studies, fairy tales, different stories from cultures all over the planet, all throughout history, and put them in a PC. Do you know what they found?
No
idea.
Clear communication. So like the stories have through lines across boundaries, across millennia, there's a guy, his name is Joe Simonton. In the 1960s, he's in America in his backyard. There's an interview on YouTube. He's just doing his thing, doing his daily business, right? And here's a fucking loud grinding come from outside, and there's a UFO landing in his backyard. Out steps 3 weird-looking, dark-skinned dudes, small men, And they are like, sorry, we messed up your field. Do you have any fresh water? And he's like, yeah, I'll go get it. So he doesn't think about it, goes and gets a pitcher of water, brings it out to him. They make him buckwheat pancakes. He's eating them. They taste like cardboard. He saves one, calls the fucking cops, says these UFO landed in my yard. They call the FBI. The FBI shows up at his door to look at the pancakes, right?
No, actually, I think I sent you a video on this.
Yeah, we've talked about it. It's just a ridiculous story, but continue.
Yes.
So there are fairy tales from medieval England where a fairy will come out of the woods in this crazy contraption, fuck up your wheat field, and apologize for it and say, can you get me a pitcher of water, fresh water? And they go get the pitcher and they bring the pitcher back. And what do they make? Buckwheat pancakes. And interestingly, they can't run out of buckwheat pancakes. So like, it's like an infinite hack. They just can keep making them. And then one day they give one of them to somebody else and they lose the ability to make the pancakes, right? So like, you go back further, more stories about fairies trampling fields, more stories about buckwheat pancakes. In the 1890s in this country, there was a flap of airship sightings all across the country. Then one day in San Francisco, this guy walks into a lawyer's office, dark-skinned guy, small, humanoid, walks in, says, I have built an airship. Here are the schematics. I would like you to look at them and then print about it. And I need legal papers drawn up. And the lawyer says, okay, I think this looks legit. You know, are you looking for investors? And he says, no, we don't want any money. It was notable because the guy even prints in the paper. He says, I think this is the first time a man tried to do business in California without wanting money from anyone, right? It was notable and weird. So these sightings happen all over the country. And people are meeting individuals that get out of these airships and they are offering pancakes. They are doing other weird things. There are, I think one of my favorites, they're flying around across the Midwest and they lower a cable and they pick up a guy on a hook and then he goes for a ride and then they let him down a couple miles away or whatever. And there was this big hoopla because there was no way this guy could have got that far away down the road and he came back on a train. And how'd he do any of that, right? About 10 years, I think it was 20 years after that flap of airships, the Wright brothers invent manned flight. If you think about the psychological repercussions of that, the reporting of that, the seeing of all those things, you give it tangibility when you do something absurd and you say, okay, people are going to remember this. It's absurd, right? Think about that word. It's absurd. The way we say it, you're going to remember.
Yeah.
I think this is non-linear communication throughout history across the borders of countries. You can't gatekeep it. They're too intelligent. So they use absurdity to communicate with us down the line historically, and then our myths tell us the truth.
So I don't really know what my thoughts are on the buckwheat pancakes. I think I do think it's very fascinating that potential fairy tales do have some type of correlation with some things that may have happened in the past, because fairy tales came from somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's someone's personal experience or just a really good author, who knows? But
what's a fairy supposed to be, right? What are they? Like physically, what do they look like?
Well, and I think that probably changes over time. And I think Graham Hancock is an interesting individual, and I like reading and researching some of the things he's talking about. But kind of the point you're talking about, Paul, is maybe the fairy tales and the myths aren't entirely accurate, but they're depicting something that was real.
Correct.
And that happened at multiple different geographical places. So in the US, it may be fairies, and in Russia, it's the Yeti, but maybe we're talking about the same thing in different forms in different places.
Well, I think that's maybe part of the communication. Why do they show up as little dark-skinned men in America? Why do they show up as weird-looking fairies in Europe during the Middle Ages? So I think if that were an aspect of reality, right? So, and then this is really nuts, and it has to do with dolphin sex and hand jobs. But like,
This is for you, Mike.
Thank you. I've been waiting.
there was a guy,
I've been waiting.
there was a guy named John C. Lilly, and he was a drug enthusiast during the 60s and the 70s. And he had this idea that if we could talk to dolphins, that we could maybe talk to, other species or whatever. Maybe they were the Rosetta Stone for like speaking to other species. So NASA happens to agree with this stance. So they get funded, right? So this John C. Lilly guy floods a house and he goes to live with a group of researchers, and they decide, to really ramp things up. They're all going to ingest LSD, and they're going to give the dolphins LSD, and they're going to live together, right? So they're in this situation together living, and they have a dolphin enclosure up above because they're trying to train young male adolescent dolphins because they're very interested in things, right? They have good focus. They're also young male adolescent dolphins that have needs. So they have female dolphins upstairs, right? And they get sick of having to drive this little cart and then run them upstairs. So there's a female researcher that takes it upon herself to start jerking off the dolphins. Right. So,
Okay. Hold on one second. Hold on before you go any further there. I mean, is that called overachieving? What would you call that right there?
I don't know that I have words for any of this just yet.
Well,
Maybe I need to see this through to completion.
Some cultures call that love.
That's true.
All in the name of science, after all.
All in the name of science.
I just want to mention dolphins are one of the only species on this planet that when shown a mirror will look in their mouth or try to see the back of their head. They're aware of that they're them. Okay. They're aware they're individuals. They have a concept of self. So like after getting these hand jobs, sadly, at least one of the dolphins fell in love with the woman and then drowned itself in a pool. I just wanted to say something for the dolphin's sake because it's a tragedy. But
Mitch, Paul and I's mutual friend that we've had on the podcast, I've made fun of him forever because he had I think it was a dolphin poster. Is that right, Paul?
I think there was more, but yeah, at least
one dolphin. Yeah. And he had challenged me with coming up with a paranormal research name using the word dolphin. And I used it as an acronym to come up with detecting otherworldly life forms perpetuated
historically by inaccurate naysayers.
Hot damn. Yes.
See,
that's it.
It's caught on.
Totally caught on.
Oh boy.
Oh man.
So
okay.
I think I want to take I want to get further into the dolphin thing, but I think it's going to have to be a standalone.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Because we're at that point where I think
we are.
We need to kind of wrap this one up. But it's a great segue for our listeners and viewers.
Part 2.
There's going to be a part 2 about these hand jobs and dolphins.
Well, there's far, far, far more to the story.
Excellent.
Just know, Echo the dolphin. It was a video game in the 90s. It's based on this research, and John C. Lilly had this idea. It was this office that he believed existed called the Earth Coincidence Control Office, Echo the Dolphin. I just want to point out, Beav, that your subconscious decided to make a paranormal UFO research group called Dolphin. That is an acronym. I just want to say that.
Well, Mitch asked me to be fair.
Well, that makes it even better.
He had a
subconscious. He had a water bed, and he did have one.
So Mitch had a water bed.
Yeah.
That absolutely makes 100% sense to me. He would have.
Yeah. It's all coming together.
It slowly is starting to come together.
He's the type of guy that when he goes out at night, he wears a nice leather jacket. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's funny.
That's Mitch.
All right, so Brian, what are your thoughts to kind of recap everything?
God, we covered a lot of ground today. I feel like I need to take some time to even digest what we said, but I think for Christopher Bledsoe, which was kind of the main context of what we were talking about, I don't know. I don't know what I believe. Paul, I think it's interesting you said that you think he believes, and you did say that you believe what he's saying.
I absolutely do. And I think, so I didn't get into it, but there is some evidence to back his claims. They put him on an EKG. This guy, at like resting, like he can just sit around, point at things in the sky, and hold a conversation, and he will be meditating in a trance at a like his brain waves are in a meditative trance at the same level as like masters in India that have studied meditation their entire lives. So while they're deeply concentrated, Bledsoe's just having conversations.
I don't know that I can explain or say one way or the other. I think it's interesting that people like Space Force are working with him. To me, it's like corroborative evidence, right? Like Bledsoe's just a story, but then when you start looking at other people or other agencies investing time and money into it, for me, it makes it a little more believable. So I think I'll stamp it with our plausible mark.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. I think that, the stuff that we've discussed here is plausible for sure. And I think that, we're kind of just setting ourselves up for future episodes because we can have, we can actually go down with the Bledsoe even further, I think, in an episode to take deeper dives in that. And then obviously we got the jerking off the dolphin stuff that we want to talk about because I'm definitely interested in figuring out like what.
Well, it's communication, right? Just for our listeners, we're not just talking about dolphins getting jerked off. I mean, ultimately, Paul, I assume this ties together with can we communicate with dolphins? And apparently, maybe the communication borders on beyond communication into the physical.
I think we have all our answers. Sex is the way we communicate. So we'll just fuck aliens when we meet them, right?
I can't think of a better way to end this episode. I'm not going to lie. I think
either.
that might be the climax.
I think that is the climax right there.
Dolphins are smart, right? They do it underwater. No smells underwater, boys. Do it underwater. You can't see anything. It's just feeling. It's just feeling. Also, any of the listeners, if you have rheumatoid arthritis or you know someone that does, Dr. Gary Nolan is relatively confident that may or may not have to do with the ability to see UFOs, or it certainly increases the likelihood that you may or may not have been abducted. So I just want anybody that has rheumatoid, if you're listening to this, at least look into the fact that you may have been abducted.
I'm making a mental note because Jacques Follet is somebody that we haven't talked about in this podcast, and we should, but Gary Nolan is somebody that we've kind of fringed around, and we should also pinpoint because those are two people that are prominent in this field and have a lot of information behind them that's worth talking about.
All right. Sounds good. And so for all of our listeners and viewers, if you like this video, obviously like and subscribe, hit the little bell up in the corner there so that you'll be notified anytime that we release new content. You can find us on Facebook, Otherworldly Encounters podcast. You can also find us on Instagram, Otherworldly Encounter podcast. And our email is otherworldlyencounter2024@gmail.com. Please write in. Let us know, your listener stories, basically your personal experiences, anything that we can potentially talk about on the show itself.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, for watching, for interacting with us. Paul, thank you for being on the show today. And for everybody out there, until next time, keep your mind open and your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.